June 17, 1402, Anatolian Plains, just outside Angora. 47 Janissary archers lay dead in a semicircle around the corpse of Prince Mahmud, his throat slit, but no enemy in sight. What the Ottoman chronicles masked as battlefield confusion was, in truth, a calculated betrayal sparked by an affair between a Janissary captain and the prince's concubine of 6 years. She was 17 when the affair began, whispers say on the cold marble of the Adern baths. The bowman died not from Mongol blades, but from poisoned arrows tipped with shaved scorpion venom and loosed in silence. Before we continue, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. The betrayal was timed with surgical precision. As Timur's cavalry faked a retreat across the dust-ridden plateau, a horn should have signaled the Janissaries to advance. It never came. Instead, Captain Selim Bey, aged 29, issued a silent hand sign, a gesture known only to his loyal cohort of 7, hand-picked for secrecy and bound by lust, coin, and vengeance. They rotated in tight formation, lowered their bows just slightly, and let fly their venom-laced shafts into the hearts of their own men. The poison, derived from Accra black scorpions and aged in donkey bile for 3 days, induced paralysis within minutes and heart failure within 10. Witnesses who survived claimed the dead gasped with eyes frozen wide, limbs twisted like uprooted vines. But before the screams rose, Selim was already gone, smuggled under a blood-drenched tarp, carried on a stolen Mongol mule toward the pine-dark fringes of Karakada. He would not be seen again for 5 years, not until the next prince bled out beneath the crescent banner, and another concubine vanished into palace shadow. But the massacre near Angora was only the opening tremor in what would become a silent civil war within the very heart of the Sultan's elite. In Edirne, as black-veiled mourners gathered in the marble hall to honor Prince Mahmud, another kind of ceremony twisted beneath the surface. 3 eunuchs were found strangled in the concubine quarters, their tongues cut out and buried under rose bushes in the fountain gardens. No official record marked their deaths. The Grand Vizier, Halil Pasha, aged 51, received a sapphire ring wrapped in bloodied silk, bearing no note. Only the sigil of the Janissary order scorched into the box's lid. Rumors flared. Selim Bey had returned, not to serve the empire, but to dismantle it from within. The ring? A warning. Or perhaps a promise. No one spoke of the prince's concubine, now 23, last seen taking confession in the Hagia Sophia's darkest chapel, her neck veiled in black pearl lace. Her name was scrubbed from the palace registries within the week, but the silk sheets in Mahmud's bed still bore her scent and 7 long golden hairs. 3 months later, deep in the Balkans, a unit of Janissary archers surrounded a caravan said to carry Persian silks and Mongol incense. But the real cargo lay beneath a false floor, 4 crates of handcrafted bowstrings laced with powdered tundra root, designed to fray and snap under pressure. A silent weapon of sabotage. The ambush wasn't ordered by the Sultan, nor by any known chain of command. It was vengeance, orchestrated by a splinter cell loyal to Selim Bey, now calling themselves the Black Draw. Their leader, a youth of just 19, went by Hassan the Hollow. He was once a palace scribe, dismissed and flogged after his rendezvous with the vizier's son was exposed in the Falcon Tower. His quiver now bore feathers dipped in lapis ink, the color of shame turned into death. When the strings failed mid-skirmish at the Battle of Varna 6 months later, 62 dead Janissaries littered the banks of the Yantra. Official reports blamed structural failures due to humidity, but a single scrap of velvet was found nailed to a tree upstream, marked with the stylized crescent of the black draw and stitched with silver thread. Honor dies when tongues lie, and hands still touch in secret. By the winter of 1403, the entire Janissary corps bore fractures like hairline cracks in porcelain. Trust dissolved faster than snow in the Sultan's tea. Archers now slept with one eye open, daggers tucked beneath their bedding of camel hide and straw. The Sultan's newest heir, 14-year-old Prince Yaqub, began training under a private guard. Not Janissaries, but Mamluk defectors, armed with curved shamshirs and cutthroat loyalties. Behind the barracks, in a shuttered alley between the armory and stables, Captain Ilhan, once Selim Bey's second, was found hanging from a cedar beam, his throat stuffed with crushed poppy petals. It wasn't suicide. He had no bruises on his palms, and his boots were polished. A message lay scrawled on the wall in goat's blood. Truth returns with every strung bow. Meanwhile, palace tapestries were quietly swapped for plainer silks, and no musicians played string instruments during military banquets, a superstition born from the rumor that Selim's poisoned bowstrings sang before they snapped. The chambers of archers echoed with suspicion and silence. One unit refused to fire during a siege near Thessaloniki, claiming their arrows whispered betrayal. The corps' once unshakable unity had splintered, and under every crescent moon, more weapons disappeared from the armory than were ever accounted for by dawn, spring of 1404. Amid the rugged defiles of the Taurus Mountains, a cold wind carried more than snow. It carried judgment. A messenger's corpse was found nailed to a tree with 10 Janissary arrows, forming a perfect sunburst in his chest. His tongue had been sliced into thirds and tied into a knot, a grim cipher left for those who understood black draw code. Hidden within his belt was a map carved into cured lambskin, pointing not to a battlefield, but to a summer hunting estate once favored by Sultan Bayezid himself, now abandoned, supposedly burned in a Mongol retreat. But deep inside its scorched wine cellar, beneath a trapdoor lacquered with dried animal fat to avoid detection, a meeting of ghosts convened. Selim Bey, aged 31 now, face weathered but eyes feral with purpose, stood at the head of a stone table littered with broken arrowheads and melted wax seals. Around him, 12 men and 2 women, all former Janissaries or palace servants stripped of name and rank. They called themselves the Final Nock. Their plan was not to destroy the empire, but to rewrite its loyalty with hunger and flame. That spring, 3 camps went up in fire, 2 princes vanished, and on the mosque wall in Edirne, someone painted a single phrase in lapis and blood. He who rewrites the draw rules the war. Summer bled into 1405, and with it came a fever of retaliation. In the crescent-shadowed corridors of Topkapi Palace, the Sultan's inner guard uncovered a cache. 17 bows rigged to backfire violently, stored behind prayer scrolls in the imperial chapel. The discovery came too late. 3 hours later, during a ceremonial archery display honoring Prince Yaqub's 15th birthday, 3 volleys misfired simultaneously. One arrow drove through the neck of a court noble, another pinned the chief astrologer's severed hand to the base of a fig tree, and the third twisted back mid-flight, slitting Yaqub's cheek to the bone. Blood soaked his ceremonial robe, stitched with golden lions. The boy survived, but his trust in the Janissaries did not. That night, he ordered 42 archers detained on suspicion of conspiracy. Only 39 were ever brought to the cells. 3 disappeared en route, and in their place the guards found only a rolled parchment bound in hair. 3 arrows, 3 wounds, 1 kingdom undone. Whispers say one of the vanished archers was a woman, bearing a scar beneath her left eye. The concubine no one confessed to remembering, and none dared to name. The Empire would never admit it, but after that night, no prince walked unguarded, no prayer room was unsearched, and no bowstring sounded without suspicion. The palace walls still echo with screams and whispers of secret oaths, silk bloodied by love, and betrayal drawn taut like the final string pulled in war. By autumn of 1406, the campaign in Wallachia offered the Sultan a chance to test his reconstituted core and to cleanse what he called the rot within the draw. Over 800 Janissary archers marched into the Carpathian mist, but 73 never left the foothills. They vanished without conflict, their campfires cold, their rations untouched, but arrows scattered as if torn from shaking hands. When scouts traced the disappearance to a glade choked with yew and fog, they found only a carved obsidian shard nailed to a tree trunk. The inscription matched Selim Bey's known cipher, but below it, a new mark. A serpent swallowing its own tail, burned into bark with promethium resin stolen from imperial stores. Within weeks, 4 Janissary officers were found dead behind their own command tents, one with feathers sewn into his eyes, one with his bowstring coiled around his intestines, like a lover's embrace, 2 drowned in a baptismal font outside a war chapel. Panic metastasized throughout the ranks. Some begged for reassignment to infantry. Some took vows of silence, mouths sealed with wax during watches. Even the Sultan's scribes hesitated to log casualties, fearful their records might attract the wrong kind of witness. But deep behind enemy lines, a captured Wallachian herald revealed what none dared confirm. A breakaway Janissary cell, now 56 strong, called the Final Nock, was moving east in secret, carrying with them the youngest bastard son of Bayezid, a boy long thought dead, swaddled in silk and secrets. The war had never been about conquest. It was a love letter written in venom and fire, every signature loosed from a longbow and aimed straight at the Empire's heart. Winter of 1407. The snow in Sofia fell like ash, covering treason with a purity it didn't deserve. Inside the monastery-turned garrison, the Sultan's elite interrogators, led by Arif the Bent, so named for his twisted spine and torturer's smile, dragged a half-frozen boy from the chapel crypt. He was 12. Wrapped in silk embroidered with the Bayezid crest, bruised but unbroken, and carrying nothing but a scroll of black vellum clutched in his bloodied fist. It bore 12 signatures, none legible, and one line etched in Archer's script. We aim not for thrones, but for truths too poisoned for crowns. As the ice melted around the pyres of slain turncoats, whispers rippled through the capital. The boy was the Empire's forgotten heir, schooled in exile, guarded by traitors who called themselves patriots. But fate, like a drawn bow, favors tension. The Sultan, paranoid and frail, collapsed days later from suspected mercury ingestion. His apothecary found crucified upside down behind the harem kitchens. Of the Final Nock, only fragments surfaced. A concubine with a burn scar where her veil once lay. A disgraced archer spotted teaching children to aim west, not east. A torn bowstring wrapped around a sultan's prayer beads. Blood had soaked the Empire's roots, but in its silence bloomed the most dangerous weapon of all, memory. And from memory, a future drawn taut, waiting only for the next archer to loose his truth. Spring of 1408. On the eve of a lunar eclipse, in the coastal fortress of Gallipoli, once a Janissary stronghold, a final reckoning unfolded. Word spread that a conclave of surviving commanders, those neither loyal to the Sultan nor to the final Nock, planned to restore the order through brute purges and iron discipline. But the shadows moved quicker. That night, a banquet held in the basalt-tiled Hall of Banners ended in blood. 43 guests fell dead within minutes from wine laced with belladonna and monkshood, dosed in micrograms by a kitchen girl whose throat bore no tongue, but whose heel held a carved seal, Selim's final mark. Above the corpses, a fresco of victory cracked and revealed a hidden mural below. Archers not in triumph, but binding their own eyes before loosing arrows into a crowd. It was said the girl left behind a single arrow embedded in the high table, encased in melted beeswax, its tip engraved with one word in Persian: silence. In that single moment, the battle for loyalty ended not with steel, but surrender. Those still breathing laid down their bows. The empire would survive, but never trust again. And on the wind from the sea, salty and scented with orchid smoke, the whispers returned, not of names, not of deeds, but of oaths once broken and fates now sealed in blood, fire, and a drawstring that haunts the hand long after the arrow is gone. Autumn, 1409. The empire breathed, but only just. Along the Bosphorus, in a shade-soaked courtyard of the Haseki barracks, the last of the old Janissary stood trial, not in courtrooms, but before their own shadows. Each archer summoned was asked a single question by the new commander of the draw. Do you remember who you draw for? Those who answered with names were executed. Those who answered with silence were spared, but marked. A hash of charcoal behind the ear. A vow to never string for man or prince again. The concubine, now 30, returned under a veil of indigo and ash to the palace that once banished her. She did not speak. She lit incense in the bedchamber of Mahmud, laid a single black feather across the pillow, and vanished before dawn. Her name no longer mattered. In the ruins of power, memory reigned, and beneath every polished tile, every echoing corridor, lingered the legacy of a course that aimed not just for the enemy, but for the lies beneath the crown. No chronicle dares ink their whole story. No hymn dares sing it. But somewhere in the imperial archive, sealed behind wax, there lies a single scroll, unsigned, unread, and wrapped in bowstring. Some say it hums when the wind shifts. Some say it remembers every arrow ever loosed in betrayal. Others say it waits, not for war, but for the next whisper willing to pull the string. Winter, 1410. Deep beneath the catacombs of Bursa, where plague carts once wheeled and forgotten bones lined the walls like soldiers in eternal formation, the final whisper was written. A boy, 16, fingers blistered from string work, eyes hollowed by secrets he should never have known, etched into the stone a sigil no longer taught, a crescent cleft by flame. He was the last of the final Nock, raised on venom milk and lullabies of treachery, trained to loose arrows from silence into lies. As muezzins called prayer over blood-soaked snow, he knelt before the tomb of Mahmud, offering not prayer, but closure. His bow, broken and buried in salt, his oath, whispered, not sworn, and when dawn crept over the frost-brittle city, only a single arrow remained, driven into the door of the palace archive, its shaft wrapped in black feather and silk laced with dried tears. None dared touch it. None dared read the scroll tied beneath. But its words bled. We served the truth, not the throne. We aimed for what history feared. And so ended the tale no scribe would pen, no sultan would speak. A tale of archers turned executioners, lovers turned ghosts, and a war born not on fields, but in beds, betrayals, and the unbearable tension of 1,000 strings humming in the dark. Spring, 1411. The old empire slept, but its wounds bled quiet beneath the marble of restructured palaces and reminted coins. No declarations followed, no trials resumed. But in a vault beneath the Hagia Irang, within a hollow bronze statue of an archer long coated in dust, a foreign emissary found something no eye had seen since Selim Bey vanished into lore. A wax-sealed quiver, untouched by time, packed with 7 arrows, each tipped not with steel, but obsidian. Each bowstring coiled in silk dyed with poppy and sage. Alongside it, a final parchment clipped with indigo-stained thread bore only a farewell, unsigned yet unmistakable. When names falter and banners fade, the draw remembers. We aimed for the lie behind the throne, not the man upon it. The emissary left the vault in silence. The quiver remains hidden, and though no archer strings for empire now, old towers still echo with ghost-fletched sighs. The Janissary archers passed into legend, not as protectors nor as traitors, but as the last to aim for truth with a poisoned heart and a steady hand. The empire endured, but trembled every time a bow was drawn, and always in the hush before ceremony, someone would glance westward and whisper, not a prayer, not a curse, but a name lost to war, to scandal, and to the soft thrum of betrayal in string. And so it ended, not with a siege, not with a coronation, but with silence. The Janissary Corps was never formally dissolved, yet no new archer would rise to take an oath under moonlight or stitch poison into feather. The palace halls learned caution, not loyalty. The war chronicles spoke of victories and defeats, but never of the fractured hands that once drew the empire's breath taut like a bowstring. Selim Bey? His body was never found. Some say he died on foreign soil, forgotten by time. Others claim he walks the eastern cliffs, aged and watching, a ghost with calloused fingers and salted scars. The concubine's face reappeared in mosaic, tucked into chapel corners where only the most devout kneel. And somewhere, locked in a chest no key dares open, sleeps the last arrow never loosed, wrapped in silk, soaked in memory, aimed still at the moment when oath and betrayal kissed. The empire lived, but never unbloodied, never untouched. And beneath every statue's shadow, truth still waits, knocked and ready. And though kingdoms rose and fell in the blood-stained centuries that followed, one truth remained etched into the broken stones of old barracks and the blackened ruins of campaign tents. Precision had a price, and loyalty an even deadlier cost. The Janissary archers, masters of their craft, had wielded not just arrows, but ideology, each shaft a sentence, each kill a clause in an unspoken rebellion inscribed in blood and betrayal. What began as mastery of war became a theology of revenge. They did not simply strike with skill. They rewrote doctrine with every whistle of fletching through fog. And though history erased their names, redacted their crimes, silenced their oaths, the legacy endured in rituals no general dares question and bow forms practiced in dusky corners of academies without explanation. For every empire has its ghosts, but only one trained them to aim before they believed, to strike before they swore. So when next you feel the breath of wind before ceremony, or hear the drawn silence before war, ask yourself, who draws the string now? And who still listens for the bow to sing? Even now, centuries drowned in dust and conquest later, the final Nock's tale coils like smoke through the vaults of forbidden memory. Not every arrow finds its target, but the ones that do more than kill. They changed the path of history itself. And though the Ottomans would rise again with might and splendor, the fires lit by Selim Bey's rebellion never truly died. Beneath each unit's footfall, in ritual parades and disciplined silence, lay buried defiance. Palace guards still glance at shadowed corners where lovers once plotted war. Novices in archer academies fumble strings that hum with ghosts, and hidden in tomb-inscribed margins are sigils that do not belong to any court, only to a truth too clean for thrones to bear. The Janissaries were masters not only of precision, but of foresight. Their draw was judgment, their silence a doctrine, their betrayal a necessary wound against unquestioned power. History may forget names, but the hands that aimed for honesty, not empire, shaped the air still. Listen closely when dusk seals the palace gates, and you may yet hear it, the quiet breath before release, the oath left unspoken. For in war, as in love, the most fatal truths are those loosed without warning, but marked forever by the hand that drew the string, and thus the tale strings to its final silence, like a bow unbent after too many truths loosed into unforgiving air. The last scroll was burned in 1412 by a priest who claimed it whispered when held above flame. His tongue rotted from his mouth 3 nights later. No one recorded his name. The palace officials said nothing. The brothels of Galata sang no songs for the dead archers. Yet each night a candle flickers in an unmarked alcove below the old mint. 7 flames, 7 shadows, 7 arrows lost to time. The Janissary order survived, reshaped, sanctioned. But the soul had already fled, buried with the obsidian shafts and bloody silk. And in the centuries that followed, commanders clutched their bows tighter, heirs kissed holy rings harder, lovers whispered softer, haunted not by what was fired, but by what was once aimed and dared not be loosed. The era ended not with war, but with memory sharpened to a point, drawn, trembling, waiting forever for the hand that dares release it again. So remember this. When steel clashed beneath banners and emperors raised goblets to false dawns, it was not only glory or dominion that cut across the battlefield. It was desire, feral, desperate, treasonous desire for truth unsanctioned, for love unfettered, for vengeance unreconciled. The Janissary archers did not merely loose arrows into enemies. They loosed legacies into time's dark marrow. Each poisoned shaft, each hidden sigil, each vanished oathmate whispered this defiance, that no power, no prince, no prayer could muzzle the ache for truth honed to a killing edge. And so their memory lingers, not etched in marble, but carved into every silence before war, every glance cast toward unreadable shadows, every tremor in a hand that grips the string. That is where the last arrow waits, and always will, because in the end, what the Empire feared most was not betrayal by blade, but by belief. Not the spilling of regal blood, but the revealing of who had touched it last and why they lied. What the Janissary archers mastered was not merely precision warfare, but the impossible discipline of knowing when not to strike, and the unbearable burden of drawing the bow anyway. Their art was not in killing, but in choosing when to cut the vein of history and when to let it pulse unraveled. No tomb honors them, no monument dares. Yet when the wind slips silver over the Bosphorus, when a falcon circles without cry, when a bow hums without hands, know this, the final draw was never fired. It waits, for the lie that deserves its silence split, and for the hand brave enough to string truth once more. So do not forget them, not the prince gutted by silence, nor the concubine who buried her name in whispers, nor the captain who turned archery into insurgency and fevered love into legend. Remember the venom that threaded through truth like a song, the scripts scrawled in blood at the edge of empire, the bows unstrung and left in ash to tell stories without voice. The Janissary archers mastered not just the mechanics of death, but its meaning, turning betrayals into scripture and precision into an immortal heresy that thrones still shudder to recall. For beneath every act of obedience they taught lies a choice, sharp as arrowhead, silent as sin. And sometimes you draw not to kill, but to remember. And remembering is the deadliest shot of all. So let this be the closing wound, the one sutured with silk, not silence. A truth too dangerous to herald, but too precise to miss its mark. The Janissary archers did not vanish. They became myth because they threatened the myth-makers. Their bows outlasted empires. Their arrows flew longer than bloodlines, and their secrets bled through kingdoms that tried to forget. Somewhere in the hollow of a ruined minaret, or beneath the soot-black tiles of a disused armory, the last whisper of their creed still breathes. Draw not for praise, not for kings, but for the lie no one dared name. And though the wind has scattered their ashes across centuries, if you dare hold a string near your heart and feel the ache, that's them, waiting, watching, still aimed at the tyranny of silence.